here we go. I want to talk about this article I read in Politico, and it was talking about this book titled The Emerging Democratic Majority. So The Emerging Democratic Majority was a book written in 2002, written by John Judas and Roy Teixeira. Dude, God, I'm the worst. And they argued that America's demographic destiny belonged to Democrats. America was becoming more multinational. It was becoming more educated. And they believed that this would lead to a permanent Democratic majority, one made up a center-left coalition of minorities, young people, women, and knowledgeable economy professionals. They expected that in the 2000s, the Democrats could possibly create an FDR-style permanent realignment due to demographics alone. And they saw the Obama 2008 victory as proving their theory right. Obama was able to win Indiana. He came close to winning in Missouri. And he was able to get 60 seats in the Senate and blow away in the House. But then Trump came along and shattered that entire theory. And now we see in their new book, they've titled, Where Have All the Democrats Gone? They're tackling the new issue facing Democrats, and they blame two major things. They blame the corporate policies enacted by Bill Clinton and Obama, which makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And then they attacked the cultural radicalism in the modern progressive movement.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something interesting to talk about because here is a perspective where someone says that the Democrats have gone too far left on certain cultural things, and it's alienating a lot of voters. We currently see young people actually supporting Trump in recent polls over President Biden. We'll talk about that in a second. We see minorities swinging to Trump in a way that we haven't seen minorities go to a Republican ever. We have, in some recent polls, Biden only getting 65% of the African-American vote, which is absolutely destructive to a Democratic chance of winning the presidency. And so Democrats have a problem. And these authors say that the Democrats have strayed too far on some mainstream issues such as race, immigration, transgender rights, and climate change. Now, my issue here with this is I don't know if I totally agree with the fact that they've strayed too far on these issues. And I wanted to kind of talk about where public opinion is on these four issues and then see if the Democrats really are so far away or if it's an issue of how they're being sold as too far away.
Okay.
Right? So first is race. So a good way that I would think about understanding where America's positions on race is looking at the approval rating of Black Lives Matter, right? Black Lives Matter is very controversial. It seems very much tied to the Democratic Party, even though it most certainly is not. Leaders of the Black Lives Movement have a lot of disagreements and distaste for the Democratic Party entirely, right? But even so, 51% of adults say they do support Black Lives Matter. And of that number, 81% of Black Americans support it, with 61% of Hispanics. So I have trouble wrestling with if 81% of Black Americans support Black Lives Matter, but Joe Biden is only getting 65% of the black vote in recent polls. Is it really a problem that he's gone too far left, quote unquote, on racial issues? If more black people are supporting Black Lives Matter than supporting him? I just don't know if that holds up as a theory on their part.
No, I think it's hard because we're dealing with a lot of kind of flimsy data points. I was listening to a podcast this morning on the Ezra Klein show that's really relevant to this. And it's he was interviewing a guy who basically has the viewpoint that all these polls are way overblown. Like they are taken way too seriously. They don't really understand human nature and as in like they're used more often as a venting mechanism to be able to express your problems with what's currently in place, right? And so that is certainly going to look worse on Biden because people do have legitimate problems with him. But it's not going to reflect how they vote in the future. And I also think on this other so that's why the poll is kind of flimsy. And on this other side with Black Lives Matter, it makes all the sense in the world to me that this is the level of support for Black Lives Matter. But it's reducing people to the one issue, right? Even if 81% of Black Americans like Black Lives Matter, you know what they probably don't like? They probably don't like that Democrats have just assumed that they have the Black vote in their pocket for decades.
So
right?
true.
Like, there are plenty of things that, even though they support these causes, there are things that Democrats have done to just make them less likable.
Yes.
And that Joe Biden does when he, I guess, trips and falls sometimes, that makes him a lot less likable to people.
But and that's a good, then that plays well into what I'm kind of getting at here. I agree with you. The issue isn't their policy positions. Their issue is that they don't do enough Black outreach. The issue is that they take voters for granted, right? That's the issue. I don't think the issue is that they lent support to Black Lives Matter and gone too far on racial issues. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah. But now, I might be wrong, but now if we look at immigration and we look at Gallup polling on the issue.
Wait, sorry, real quick. Just one thing that came to my mind.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That I want to stick on that. I think you're right that it's not, the problem isn't them supporting Black Lives Matter, but maybe there is an element of the white college-educated intellectual that says they're for Black Lives Matter and posts a black square on their Instagram story that disgusts Black people and makes them want to vote for Democrats less.
Yeah, and that makes sense. That makes total sense. But that doesn't explain any shift to a Republican? Right?
No,
right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. It makes the understanding.
It's just another piece.
Yes. But we see Trump gaining support among the African American community of people of color.
Yeah.
And it's shocking to me how that happened, and I don't understand it. I think a lot of it might be, well, we'll get into it. Maybe there are some things in here that we can unpack.
Okay.
So the next one is immigration. So we talk about Gallup polling. In 2023, they found that 41% of Americans say they want less immigration, 31% say that it should stay the same, and only 26% want it increased. Well, that's hard. That's hard because Democrats definitely have the perception of wanting increased immigration, and we're here definitely saying that we want increased immigration. And
Yes.
that is not a very popular position in the country right now. And I can definitely see Black voters and working class Hispanic voters being threatened by immigration, thinking that they're coming and hurting their job opportunities.
So it's interesting. This is another thing the podcast talked about, is how Biden has strayed away from the immigration issue.
Totally.
Right?
Dude, 10-foot pole.
Yeah,
Don't even
he
touch
doesn't
it.
want to touch it. So it is weird that his polling with Hispanics goes down because of it. But this guy made the case that the trade-off is that he gains more white voters. Because I guess the idea to him was that these Hispanic voters might be more okay with immigration, whereas the white middle class voters have more of a problem with it, so they get a little bit closer. They warm up to Biden more because of it. I don't know about that,
Right.
Because I'm skeptical about the Hispanic voters being more okay with immigration.
I'm skeptical with Hispanic voters actually being okay with immigration. We have a lot of comments in our comment section very frequently from Hispanic people saying, I don't want any more immigrants. We get that type of comment all the time, saying my family came in legally. My family's been here for like 2 decades, and it's not fair that these people get to come into the country. And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that they're right. So I disagree with the authors on race. I kind of agree with the authors on immigration. Okay. Now they talk about transgender rights.
Okay.
They say that Democrats have gone too far on transgender rights. Well, when we look at Gallup polling about transgender rights, we can see that 64% of people say that they want laws, or that they would want laws and policies that would protect transgender people from discrimination in jobs, housing, and public spaces. Only 10% of people strongly oppose this. Now, that seems pretty good because the Democrats have passed bills regarding the idea that, you're not going to be able to get discriminated against based off of your gender identity.
Yeah.
But this doesn't mean that the Democrats are necessarily winning the cultural issue and the cultural point, even if they're winning the policy point, because in September 2017, 54% of people said that your sex is that a person is a man or a woman is determined by their sex assigned at birth. And that number has actually increased over the last 5 years, showing that there is a less acceptance of the idea of being trans and what being a man or woman means.
Yeah.
So this is also a hard thing. Republicans have ran on transgender issues.
Yeah.
And they haven't done very well on that issue. Michigan was a great example of that. Michigan's governor's race, Gretchen Whitmer versus Tudor Dixon in 2022. Tudor Dixon's race was basically all about transgender stuff.
Okay.
And being against transgender stuff. And then Gretchen Whitmer won by like 10 or 11 points.
Okay.
Right. Totally swept the floor with her. But I don't know if that is enough. I don't know, because it's hard for me to read these two data points at the same time, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. I think I understand that. I think, okay, I can read these and say, just because I personally don't think that a biological male that identifies as a woman is a woman does not mean that I think they should get discriminated against because of it.
That's the right way to interpret it, I think.
Yes.
And so that's why Republicans lose on the issue, I think, is because they are putting bills out there that do directly oppose their rights and make it harder for them to be integrated fully into society.
Interesting, because I would think they just don't lose on the issue. They lose on the issue just because it's
people don't care.
Yeah, it's not important to people. It's so much more important to the media as like a potential outlet for expressing how Democrats are radical. The one thing I was thinking though is that this is where I think Democrats are hurt the most, and I think we've talked about it before, but it's not even because they have the wrong ideology, but it's because of their militancy in pushing it. I think I can have a lot of compassion for someone who doesn't really can't share a personal experience with feeling a certain gender, right? To be able to connect with someone else and to accept that they have had that experience. I think it takes a very radical acceptance that someone has had a fundamentally different life than you.
Yeah.
And they feel something fundamentally different than you feel, and for you to be okay with that. But the way that Democrats, I mean, especially the hard left, right? The way that they talk about this, it's you are evil.
Evil.
If you don't accept them.
You're committing genocide if you don't think that transgender women should be able to participate in women's sports at a certain percentage, at a certain level.
Exactly.
Like, you're committing genocide if you don't agree with that.
Yes.
That's ridiculous rhetoric.
Yes.
That is very alienating.
Exactly. And so I understand that they're trying to push for trans people to be normalized in society, which is hugely important.
Very important.
Hugely important. But I think in doing so, they also paint themselves as the bad guy. Like, you see the speeches of them yelling, and they speak with like a violent type of rhetoric, the type of rhetoric that you see Trump kind of speaking with in videos, that you're like, this is why this person is scary. And you're like, I don't like, it's scary to be called the enemy like that, right? And to have a potentially violent idealistic group coming after you.
Yeah,
so,
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Next, she talks about climate change. She thinks Democrats have gone too far in climate change. I just fundamentally disagree with this point entirely.
Same.
There has been plenty of polls talked about this, public opinion research, and we can see that 2/3 of Americans prioritize developing alternative energy sources like wind and solar, and that 2/3 of Americans favor the U.S. taking steps to become carbon neutral by 2050. It is not reasonable to suggest the Democrats have gone too far on climate change, I don't think.
I agree. It's hard for me to get this one.
Maybe like gas prices going up because of Democrat policies, which then hurt them. But that's not really the fundamental issue, which these authors argue, that they say it's like deep ideological differences. I just don't think that that's how this works.
Maybe not. Yeah, it wouldn't be about the idealistic difference, the ideological difference. It would be about
the messaging difference.
Yeah, or like the this is so important, and you need to feel like this is so important, and that the world is ending if we don't address that.
Yeah, and it's also the gatekeeping, right?
Yes.
It's also like, okay, we can agree with 9 things out of 10, but on that 10th thing that you disagree with, I'm going to kick you out of my space.
Yeah.
Right. And then a conservative movement will say, okay, you can stick with me on like 5 out of the 10 and you'll still be in my space.
Yes.
Liberals always have to be better with that because the truth is liberals are very principled. Okay, I shouldn't say that. Conservatives are principled too in certain respects, okay? Mm-hmm. But liberals are very, very passionate about their social causes, which is good. It's good energy to have. But when it stops you from building big tent coalitions that make gaining political power possible, it hurts any type of progress you're going to make.
Yes, they're at times harmfully protective and defensive of those own values that they have.
Yeah.